Well guys, I've never made a video responding to comments before, but I actually commented on a YouTube poll on Talk Radio that got some responses I actually chuckled at. We literally had viewers begging to spend the public's hard-earned tax money like Labour voters, or should we say have the government borrow more money against your kids' future and indeed your own. The topic itself was in relation to MPs and their security that follows the David Ames incident yesterday, which, while terrible, should never be an excuse for knee-jerk reactions that will cost the taxpayer stupid amounts of money. I'm sure you've all seen the calls for 24-hour protection of MPs because the magic money tree is always there, isn't it? But essentially we actually had commenters saying the public purse should be used for MPs to have this 24-hour security. These I assume are meant to be conservative viewers, or as The Guardian would say, right-wingers watching GB News. This is obviously despite the fact they're sitting there wanting yet more spending after the 2 years that we've had, you know, the sort of spending that Corbyn would have been proud of. Myself, I find it truly baffling for various reasons, but mostly because the guy being Somalian could end up saying a lot if you ask me. It will certainly say that diversity is our strength, don't you all think? And in fact, I actually wait for Labour MPs to come out and say that after all this. You know, I really wouldn't put it past them. Now, of course, the BBC have called him a British Somalian, which makes about as much sense as them calling BLM mostly peaceful protesters, but we expect this from the BBC at this point, don't we? Now, when it comes to the public paying for their protection, I have to point out immigration was not a policy the public implemented or wanted, but one politicians implemented and clearly want. I also wonder how many members of the public have died at the hands of the people let into this country by our politicians. Where was their 24-hour protection, or is their life not important? Do they just pay for politicians until they end up butchered by someone the politicians have welcomed in with open arms? If anyone can make an excuse to get around that, I'm here waiting. Now obviously Labour should shoulder a shitload of guilt not only for Tony Blair kicking off the influx, but for supporting up until now every Tom Dick and Allah Akbar shouting wanker coming into the country. Literally no vetting, no worries, just let them all in is Labour's policy, as you know. The Tories also hold a lot of blame because they've been in charge for 10 years now and have only let more security risks into the country almost every day. As many of you know, ministers are to blame for all of this shit show. The warning signs were there, weren't they? And if it turns out the police knew he was a threat and did nothing, then they're also to blame. As you know, the public have done fuck all in this and didn't invite these people here, but they're expected to pay for the whole party. For this obvious reason, the public should not be forced to fund protecting MPs from something they didn't stop despite claiming they would. Now, of course, I have sympathy for the MP himself and obviously his family. It should not have happened, and he was not even a minister, you know, in control of these policies at any point during his time in Parliament. Others have clearly let him down, like they let down the general public, who don't have any protection either, do they? They are exposed like a fucking nerve to all sorts of crime every day. A hell of a lot more than politicians, I shouldn't even need to say. We all see the reports of many kids stabbed far too often, and they don't have 24-hour protection, do they? The whole argument for MPs' protection is obviously based on emotive headlines and the idea that there's some magic money tree, you know, to pay for it all, which, like I said, is gonna be hundreds of millions of pounds. As you've all guessed, this is obviously complete bollocks because tax will have to go up to fund it yet again, unless of course you get Diane Abbott to work her mathematical magic on them figures. I mean, Tony Blair costs us millions a year last I heard, and that's just one guy, as you know. 21 royals getting round-the-clock protection cost us £100 million, it was reported in 2010. So, on that basis, how much do you think 650 MPs is going to cost in 2021? My money is on many hundreds of millions without any international travel, which will cost a shit ton more for obvious reasons. But I have to say, the comments responding to what I wrote did make me chuckle a little bit. I'm not sure they thought through the costs of all of this shit. Now, I only said that MPs should have security if they're willing to pay for it themselves. The public should not be paying for it, in my opinion. That obviously should not be controversial, but some people naturally disagreed with me. One even asked me this question here. If you were a public servant, would you expect the state and the people to cover the cost of your protection, or would you say your employer, the British public, was not responsible and therefore you would pay the substantial cost yourself? Oh, I think I can anticipate what the answer would be. Now obviously following that I gave a brief answer to this question at the time, but he answered it for me in his own question itself. The moment he said the British public was not responsible, therefore it's on me, is exactly my point here. I am responsible for my safety, no one else. I don't expect the public to fund my safety, and I literally never would. Being a public servant or not is completely irrelevant. But as I said in my response, I wouldn't work as a public servant, and if I did, I still wouldn't expect the public to fund 24-hour security or any security for that matter. At the end of the day, it's a dog-eat-dog world where I come from, with stabbings more often than many blokes get to go balls deep on their pig-ugly wife. At the end of the day, your safety is on you in the real world, so I look after myself as I have done for my entire life so far. Plus, if you want to go down that route, why does the mere peasant not deserve this same level of safety that an MP does? Is his risk or life less than that of an elected official? I certainly don't think so. I don't care if you're on benefits, graft your ass off 12 hours a day or not. Nothing makes an MP better than any of you, full fucking stop. They don't deserve nothing more than you, and my opinion is never gonna change on that fact, I can tell you that. Much like you paying for their security, this is something I'm never gonna support, and it's a hill I will literally die on. Now, the next comment itself was equally great like that one. Well, it was the second from next, because the one below that one there was someone saying that he had got me. Clearly, he had me by the bollocks on that one there. Sunshine. Career fucking ended, I guess. Guys, I better crawl back under my rock rather quick. But as I expect you can all probably tell, I had a good laugh with this last night while I was fixing my editing PC. It took a shit on me, but that doesn't really matter right now. Up next, we had another great comment that made me chuckle a little bit. It reads, just saying, in the private sector, in areas that could be attacked, your company pays for security, which obviously is completely flat wrong, because take in London for example, food delivery drivers are robbed of the food, money and their bike, car or whatever else it is pretty often. Do you think that Domino's Pizza or KFC are paying for driver security? Because if you do, the crack pipe needs to be put down. Up next, he says the British taxpayer votes in and employs MPs to run the shop. They should receive adequate protection. Well, the MP asked to take this job. The public didn't force him to do it. Next, he said, given an MP has just been stabbed to death today, I think the public's representative should have protections from loonies and terrorists. Oh, you mean the people they let into the country and don't lock up? He finished up with, why shouldn't the taxpayer pay for that? It's a reasonable expectation to be protected at work. Yes, it's a reasonable expectation for the public to be protected by our politicians, not importing the sort of people that are going to run round stabbing others. Of course though, none of that really matters, because at the end of the day, the taxpayer shouldn't be funding this sort of security. Many of the problems, and indeed the reason why this is all being called for, could have been stopped if the politicians would have done what the public actually fucking wanted. You know, controlled immigration for the last 20 or 30 years. Now, as I said, while it's terrible that this MP died, knee-jerk reactions like this, costing us hundreds of millions, is just bollocks and shouldn't be allowed, and people need to realise why it shouldn't. You ain't gonna want your tax money to be raised after this, I can fucking tell you that now, and if you do, then you're certainly an idiot. The government's gonna be doing that plenty in the coming years without this bollocks.
Where